Welcome to this episode of Best of America by Horseback. I'm Tom Seay. The Chisholm Trail. It's part of Western legends and cowboy history. The Chisholm Trail exemplifies the cowboy spirit, ingenuity, and determination. It's celebrated in Western movies, poetry, and music. Over the next 4 consecutive weeks, Best of America by Horseback will share with you highlights of the ride we organized and led with nearly 90 riders along the historic Chisholm Trail in Kansas. An estimated 5 million head of cattle were driven along this route from deep in the heart of Texas to newly established railheads in Caldwell, Wichita, and Abilene, Kansas. Camps grew to settlements and eventually cities. Small shops turned into booming industries. Farmers and cowboys became business tycoons. The trail brought change to all who lived near it or rode along it. Today you can ride along and see wagon ruts on the trail. We will ride the heart of the Chisholm Trail from Caldwell, Kansas, known as the Border Queen town, to Wellington, Mayfield, Clearwater, and Wichita. We will meet the people and visit the towns that made this ride so special for us and who are committed to preserving the history of the Chisholm Trail and the Western way of life for future generations. Join me now for part 1 of the Chisholm Trail ride starting in Caldwell, Kansas. I'm Tom Seay. We'll be right back.
On this episode of Best of America by Horseback, Tom Seay is riding with over 90 riders in Kansas along the historic Chisholm Trail during a special week-long ride starting in Caldwell, Kansas and ending in Wichita. Months of planning and organizing went into this ride, with constant communication between committees, towns, and individuals to make sure riders would be safe first and foremost, but also that they would have the opportunity to be part of the history of this historic trail in the towns they would visit along it. While an unusually wet and stormy spring in Kansas brought constant change to the ride plans and the route, Best of America by Horseback and our riders persevered, riding in mud, rain, heat, and extreme humidity. Conditions certainly experienced by the thousands of cowboys who drove an estimated 5 million head of cattle along the trail. Our riders kept going with a positive attitude and determination, riding this historic trail by horseback in the same conditions as its original cowboys over a century before them. Deputy Sheriff Sam Wiley, a professional law enforcement officer with the true heart of a cowboy, both in his way of life and code of ethics, planned the route for us and helped lead the ride.
We met here a few months ago. I have teased you relentlessly. You laid out a trail, and then it rained. Came up with a new route, then it rained. Came up with a final route, and we had a flood. And then the time came to do the ride, we had to change it again. And then each day of the ride, I think the weather has just dictated constant change. But that was part of it back then as well, wasn't it?
Right. You know, to think that they drove cattle every day and made mile after mile after mile is pretty naive. I'm sure there was days of drought. I'm sure there was days of wet where it was just not feasible to drive the cattle. Just let them sit, let them take shelter if they can, let them graze, and let the boys rest. I mean, there's something you can't predict as the weather, especially in Kansas. It changes a lot, changes often, and so I think that this is, even though this is the rainfall this year's out of the ordinary, we don't ever get this kind of rainfall. At the same time, I think they had to encounter that a lot on the trail, that different changes that they had to adapt to, and they did.
You're a pretty easygoing fellow. You're a police officer, sheriff, deputy. Nothing seems to rattle you. I remember one morning, we were just pulling out with 40 trailers, and the call came in, flood, road change. Didn't seem to bother you in the least. we just find another route and find another plan. But you're pretty easy going. Is that kind of a requirement to be able to work with cattle and do a big ride like this?
To be effective and be successful, I think you have to be calm. And that's something, even though I had driven cattle in different situations, you know, for other ranchers and stuff growing up, that's something I did learn on the cattle drive, is that it's not hurry up and get them there. You got to get the cattle there, but they still have to have weight on them.
Sam worked tirelessly to make it a safe ride. Because of severe storms and flooding along the original planned route, he had to make changes a multitude of times over 5 months. Our staff and riders, coming from as far away as Florida, California, and New England, gathered at the ride's first camp just outside of Caldwell, Kansas, as guests of Dakota and Clarissa Davis, owners of the Caldwell Livestock Market. This was a last-minute change as the airport fields where we were planning to camp were flooded. It was a huge favor for the Davises to let us stay at the livestock market, and a luxury to have stalls and running water for the horses to start the ride.
The whole premise of this is that we're riding the Chisholm Trail when we brought cattle north from Texas, and I thought that was very appropriate that we started from a livestock market there in Caldwell.
To welcome our riders and share the history of their town, Caldwell hosted a dinner and entertainment the first night.
It is 1880, and for each of the next 6 years, during the summer months when the Texas cattle make their way north, Caldwell will load upwards of 100,000 longhorns onto rail cars right outside of where this building is later built.
And they endured wild stampedes and drenching rains and swollen rivers and outlaws and confrontations with native tribes just to get to the end of the trail.
Our riders were honored to be treated to a delicious banquet meal, historical speakers and reenactments that made history come alive and placed our riders in the middle of what could have been a real saloon brawl that moved out into the streets. Once upon a time, this quiet community of Caldwell, Kansas was a rowdy western cowtown known as the Border Queen, full of saloons, cowboys, and wild adventurers making their way up and down the newly established Chisholm Trail. Tom Seay spoke to the riders and people of Caldwell. He reflected on what he considers to be a privilege to be able to ride horses all across this country, especially on historic trails like the Chisholm Trail, where you can still see the wagon ruts and feel the history as you ride. Tom also spoke about the people he met who live in Caldwell, their sense of pride in their country, community, and preservation of its rich history. He said their values make Caldwell a wonderful community to live in and raise a family. Karen Matos, our special events coordinator, presented a plaque and proclamation to Mayor Mark Arnold on behalf of the city for their efforts in preserving the history of the trail. Our co-host and cowboy singer and songwriter Del Shields entertained the crowd with his own original cowboy songs and some other cowboy favorites. When Best of America by Horseback returns, the ride begins from the Caldwell Livestock Market through downtown Caldwell and under the arch, and then out to the countryside where millions of cattle once grazed on their way north along the historic Chisholm Trail. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the special series on Best of America by Horseback's Chisholm Trail ride from Caldwell, Kansas to Wichita. The next morning, riders readied their horses, packed food, water, and necessities in their saddlebags, then moved their rigs in a long caravan ahead to the next camp at Wellington Lake. It took quite a while to get that many rigs out of the parking lot.
I think there was over 40 trailers and vehicles going up the road following you, and I don't know if you had a chance to see, by the time we'd gone 1, 2 into the 3rd mile, you could still look back and see the last trailers coming around.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
It was impressive, and I think the the citizens out in the county, you know, were pretty taken back by, wow, what's all this truck traffic, you know, and I hope that they will be able to, you know, take the opportunity to view the show and see that the representation that's going right through their backyard, you know, and that there is light being shed on that little corner of America.
The City of Wellington hosted our riders at the beautiful Wellington Lake and recreation area for the second night's camp. They provided picnic tables and fire rings in a large mowed area where we could camp near the lake. Buses provided by Sumner County transported drivers back to their horses at the livestock market in Caldwell. Many of the riders wore period clothing and tack that would have been used during the late 19th century. Riders were excited and anxious to begin the ride along this historic Chisholm Trail. Riders left the livestock market and rode along a small dirt road towards town. Within minutes, they saw deer and began to feel the historical importance of preserving this trail and the life that surrounds it. The townspeople of Caldwell gathered along the streets to cheer on the riders as they passed through the town and under the Caldwell Arch. The Chisholm Trail dates all the way back to the mid-19th century America. It's named after the original trailblazer, Jesse Chisholm. Jesse was a trader of Scottish and Cherokee descent, which gave him a unique ability to trade goods between settlements, the U.S. Army, and Indian tribes from all backgrounds. He spoke over a dozen Native American languages. Together with his friend Black Beaver, a rancher and trapper from Delaware, Jesse built up and converted military and Indian trails into what would eventually be his namesake, the Chisholm Trail. The trail was initially used for carrying heavy wagons full of goods to and from either end point of the Red River and Kansas City, but it wasn't long before this famous Midwestern trail met its bigger client, the Texas Longhorn.
It was little Joe the Wrangler, he'll never wrangle more.
Cattle were almost worthless in Texas after the Civil War due to an overabundance, but were in high demand in the North and the East. Many cattlemen sought ways of supplying their cattle to those areas where higher demand would get them higher prices, sometimes as much as 10 times higher. Joseph McCoy, a cattle buyer from Illinois, persuaded the Kansas Pacific Railroad officials to lay track to Abilene, Kansas in 1867. He then began building pens and loading facilities and sent word to Texas cattlemen that a new cattle market and railhead was open. That year, some 35,000 head of cattle were moved northward along the Chisholm Trail to Abilene, and McCoy's stockyard became the largest west of Kansas City. The number doubled each year until 1871, when 600,000 head of cattle went to market. Over the years, an estimated 5 million head of Texas cattle went to market along the Chisholm Trail. Stay tuned for more of Best of America by Horseback's Chisholm Trail Ride. Welcome back to this special series on Best of America by Horseback's Chisholm Trail Ride from Caldwell, Kansas to Wichita. Before heading out of town, the riders rode past the local elementary school to wave to the kids of Caldwell. The paved roads of town gave way to dirt roads and wheat fields. Much of the landscape along the Chisholm Trail has not changed a great deal. Once sprawling grasslands where thousands of cattle grazed on their way north are now croplands of wheat, soybeans, and even cotton. Several riders from Tom Seay's Mexico to Canada ride joined Tom on this ride, as well as kids from the Florida Sheriff's Boys Ranch in Live Oak. Jeff Parker, his wife and father, brought the kids all the way from Live Oak, Florida, to study and relive the history along the Chisholm Trail. They brought saddle horses that the kids had to feed and care for, along with a small covered wagon and a team of horses. They were outriders and assisted Tom with various duties throughout the week. The wagon carried supplies and provided a ride for riders who got tired or overcome by heat. Because of flooding and swollen rivers, Sam had to change the route to Wellington Lake, sticking primarily to the dirt roads. It was too wet to cross the ranches, and the rivers were too high to cross, as originally planned, which made the first day much longer than expected. It was a long 23-mile day in high heat and humidity. We were extremely pleased to have several younger children join us on this historic ride for the entire week. Del Shields' granddaughter, Brooklyn, rode the entire ride, as well as little Dean Thomas. Mac, a friend of Sam's, joined us on the first day. He rode 23 miles on the trail before he had to play in a baseball game that evening. Tough cowboy, riding all day, all the way, with Sam on his little pony. And Jocelyn and Addie rode with us in Clearwater. It is so important to get these young kids involved in riding and maintaining our Western lifestyle and culture. Along the route, right on the Chisholm Trail, Bob and Carolyn Ginn and their family hosted our riders on their ranch for a lunch stop where they had time to rest under huge shade trees. They also prepared and offered the riders cool refreshments. It was an extremely hot and humid first day, with most of the riding out in the open sun. The shady lunch stop was a welcomed relief. Mike Andra, owner of the Wichita Union Stockyards Event Center and KWLS radio station in Wichita, brought in huge tanks of water for our horses and visited with our riders.
I mean, they just look forward to this. I've talked to a number of them. They look forward to this every year. I mean, they schedule their whole life around going on these adventures with Best America by Horseback. And I was just, you know, I've watched it so many times on the Cowboy Channel. You know, maybe 2 or 3 times a week I'll watch it. And I always wanted to just see how it unfolds, and it's truly amazing how it really comes across.
Another outrider, Carmen Schultz, helped Sam with the planning of the original route for the ride. Carmen was also part of the cattle drive celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Chisholm Trail in 2017.
This particular drive, I teased Sam to no end because the weather caused changes in the planning every single day, and after we got here, every single day. Didn't seem to faze you, didn't faze Sam, didn't faze me. A lot of people were panicking, but this is the way it really was.
Definitely.
With weather and change.
Right.
The history you've studied on the Chisholm Trail, tell me about it. What are the parts that you enjoyed the most and are dear to your heart?
Talking about the drive and the drives and what those boys went through, and even there were some ladies that had short drives through the Chisholm Trail, moved their cattle. I just enjoy it all. I mean, it's amazing what they did, what they had to go through, the hours they spent, the days they spent. I enjoy riding my horse, so anything I can do that puts me on horseback, Chisholm Trail is perfect.
For more information about visiting Caldwell and their events like the annual Chisholm Trail Festival, you can visit their website, cityofcaldwellks.com. For a DVD copy of the Best of America by Horseback Chisholm Trail series, you can call our office at 540-829-9555 or visit our website, bestofamericabyhorseback.com.
Thank you so much for watching this special episode of Best of America by Horseback as we travel the historic Chisholm Trail. We were honored and grateful to be able to ride this trail and visit with the wonderful communities who welcomed us into their towns and with the ranchers who allowed us to cross their land. Please join us next week as we continue riding along the Chisholm Trail, exploring the history, the towns, the people, and all the surrounding history of that. I'm Tom Seay, and we'll see you next week on Best of America by Horseback.